came across a saying about Alzheimer's disease. And again, I just want to start for the group that Alzheimer's disease is one type of dementia, right? We all know that Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, but there are well over 70 types of dementia, and some professionals I've heard speak have said there's more than 70, there's over 100. But there's, you know, maybe a handful of very common ones in there, and Alzheimer's disease is actually the most common. So I'm just going to read this to you. It's not in my presentation, but I thought it was fairly impactful because the topic tonight is something that is really a fundamental in providing care for people with a dementia. And the communication piece is a real challenge for family and for staff. It's not really difficult to learn or understand. The problem is it takes continual practice. And because we all are of an age and a life experience where we've done things a certain way for a long time, it's hard on us to change our own ways as caregivers. So a lot of what you may learn to provide proper care is teaching yourself new techniques and understanding that the fundamentals are the fundamentals, and in order to succeed you have to practice or follow the fundamentals in order. So this is what I found on the internet, and I just wanted to share it with you. Maybe it will resonate for some of you or all of you, I don't know. It's called 10 Requests from a Person with Alzheimer's. And I won't go 1 through 10, but you'll hear the 10 levels. So first of all, please be patient with me. I am the helpless victim of a brain disease. Talk to me, even though I cannot always answer you. Be kind to me. Each day of my life is a desperate struggle. Consider my feelings. They are still very much alive within me. Treat me with dignity and respect, as I would have gladly treated you. Remember my past, for I was once a healthy, vibrant person. Remember my present, for I am still living. Remember my future, though it may seem bleak to you. Pray for me, for I am a person who lingers in the midst of time and eternity. And love me, and the gifts of love you give will be a blessing forever. So some of that we may, digest and think about as we go through this presentation tonight. And I'm crossing my fingers for all of us that the technology is going to work, and I'm going to try and flip you between some of the slides in the presentation and then coming back to me live. I do have my contact information on the last slide, and I have requested more time at the end of the session so that we are not cut off and that we can once again go in alpha order to ask one question per community. If time permits, I will come back through the communities to ask the questions that may still be on your mind. And we started with A's last week, so we're going to start with the Winklers tonight so that we work backwards. But please keep an ear open, because you may be surprised at how many people in other communities are thinking of the same questions you are, and to avoid repeating the answers when at all possible. So a little bit of background on just the history of the Alzheimer's disease and dementias. So we've already talked that it's the most common form of dementia, but it is definitely not a normal part of aging. Last year, there were almost 500,000 people, Canadians, diagnosed with the dementia. And that was a stat that was taken from what was called Rising Tide, which was a study that was commissioned by the Alzheimer's Society of Canada. So that stat comes actually from 2008. And they were looking at the generational view right up until about 2038, that if interventions were not adapted, what would happen to the general population with baby boomers coming into older adulthood and the prevalence of dementia in a whole. So it was kind of thought that by 2038, the 500,000 people who were diagnosed from 2008 would at least double by 2038. Now the startling part about that is there certainly aren't enough caregivers, paid caregivers, or personal care homes or supportive living complexes to accommodate all of us. So more and more care requirements are coming from families and community. So it's significantly important whether you are a professional staff care provider or a spousal caregiver or a son or daughter or relative, that we all try to understand a little bit more about this disease and how to engage meaningful activities with people who have a dementia. Not only is it meaningful for them, but it certainly reduces stress for caregivers and offers us as family and community an opportunity to engage meaningfully also. Talk about a dementia. Often people will have difficulties with perhaps a variety of functions. They may have difficulties identifying familiar places, people, or objects that are quite well known to them. Certainly, there are challenges with the passage of time. I'm not sure in the room where you are at right now, but where I'm at in Winnipeg at St. Boniface Hospital, there's no windows in this room. We have artificial light, and there would be no way that I would have any idea if I had a dementia. I would have no idea that it was morning or evening or middle of the night, unless there was a window that I could clearly see outside and either get an idea that it was light or dark. And particularly on a day like today where it's overcast and very snowy, again, it would be a real challenge to determine if it was 10 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So time can be a real challenge for people who have a dementia. We already spoke about difficulties with family and friends, recognizing them. We have a saying that we teach on, which is last in, first out. So when we look at some of the challenges with recognizing family and friends, very simply, an example of this could be that for an older adult person, that they may start to slip up a little bit on grandchildren's names or who they belong to. And that would be an example of perhaps the last introduction of the family member into the family. So usually an older adult, a parent, may lose sight of the grandchildren's order or who they belong to or their names before they would lose track of their own children's names or their order. So that last in, first out rule can often be applicable. It can also happen that a person with dementia will not recognize themselves. And we are heightened to this, particularly in unsafe environments, and often we look at those environments which could be bathrooms or kitchens if we're looking in a home environment. So anything that would be wet or slippery, the safety issue is really heightened. But it wouldn't be uncommon for an older adult who may be encouraged to go into the bathroom to disrobe to have a bath. It may not be uncommon for them to go into the bathroom and come out very suddenly, startled, and you could be met with, I'm not going back in there till that person comes out. And caregivers could be very mystified on who they're actually talking about until they re-enter the room and check behind the shower curtain and maybe in the closet, whatever else is in your bathroom, until they realize that what may have happened is that mom or dad was looking in the mirror and saw their reflection but didn't recognize themselves. So you have to really understand that if mom is 80 years of age and she's looking in the mirror and she doesn't recognize that person in the mirror, then in that moment at least, mom's not an 80-year-old woman. She is whatever other age or level she perceives herself at that time, and likely you're not going to know that until you have a dialogue with her. It's not uncommon to say, that for mom to say, I don't know who that person is, but I'm not taking my clothes off to get in the tub until that person leaves. And you might say, well, mom, that's you. And you can be met very suddenly with, oh, no, it's not. I don't know who that is, but it's not me. I don't have gray hair. I don't look like that. So these are some of the challenges that can take place in a person with dementia. The other thing about the communication piece is often as the disease progresses, there can be a lot of challenges with finding words. And there's kind of examples of this, and to stay away from clinical terms and just work in maybe more basic terms, people with the dementia can have troubles finding the right word. They, in fact, know what they're talking about and what they want, but they may not get the word immediately. So I often, when I teach, I may use an example that a person with dementia may point to someone else who perhaps is wearing a watch. And they may say, you know, I don't have one of those things that you're wearing on your wrist, but what time is it? And of course the word, when you listen to them, is they can't think of the word watch. But clearly they know what they want. They're pointing to your wrist, they're pointing to that thing that's on your wrist, and they verbalize that they need to know the time. So that would be indicative of lack of finding the proper word. But then you can take it a step further than that, and there can be complications with processing. So it's not about the right word or the wrong word. It might be something as simple as someone speaking to me as a person with dementia and asking me to pass them the pen on the table. And I know you can't see it here, but in front of me I have a green pen, and I have a highlighter, and I also have a remote. So someone may say, you know, Maria, would you please pass me the pen? And I want to oblige, I want to participate, so the answer is okay. And now I'm going to kind of look around and get an idea of the pen. And we might go through trial and error, like, oh, no, not that, Maria, the pen. And then I might be reaching for something else, and it might be, no, the pen, the green pen, the thing that you write with. And it might be a process of elimination until I actually land on what the object is, and then I can participate in the action. So you can clearly have challenges with finding the right word, and you can also have challenges with the processing of the information. And it's not just figuring out what someone wants me to do necessarily, but specifically it has a lot to do with the length of time that we allow people to digest the question or the statement. Many times we find that caregivers are speaking either in a tone or pace that exceeds the ability of the person with dementia to actually really grasp what we're talking about. And yet I'm still thinking about it, and just as I'm about to respond, the caregiver goes on to something else. You know, you kind of have that, oh, okay, now what are we talking about? And you start again. So you really need to be mindful the pace of your conversation and ensure that you're actually speaking directly to the person and that they're ready to receive you, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about that at another time. So I'm going to flip to a slide for a second, and this, the next two slides are a little bit of self-exercise. So this slide in particular, I want you just to think in your own mind. You can talk in your room if you want, because you should be on mute. But I want you to look at the two statements, and it's very significant that you get an idea, that you get an idea of what this is leading to. But the question is, in your room, how many of you think that the first statement is correct versus the second statement? So really amongst yourselves, I'm asking you to decide, is it a person with dementia, the dementia bolded, large, or is it the second statement which emphasizes they're a person with the dementia, small? And you don't have to admit, or if you're discussing in a group, share your thoughts, but fairly significant statements. And clearly, the right response is that they're a person first. The dementia is always second. They never lose being who they are. It's our ability to figure out how to communicate and engage beyond that point. So hopefully you all passed that one. Next slide. Now this is something that you again can do on your own or you can do as a group. But take a piece of paper, so you can either individually get something to write on or work on a group. And I'll give you a couple minutes, but this is important. So I want you to write down all the adjectives, all the descriptive words that come to mind when you think of someone who has Alzheimer's disease. And I want you to write as many descriptive words as you can in the next 2 minutes, and I'll give you that time. Okay, so that's just about 2 minutes. And, you know, the one challenge is I can't, well, you know what? Maybe I can do this. I'm going to pick on a couple towns there, and I'm going to ask you to share your paper with me. So I'm wondering if I can put, I am going to put Steinbach on the spot, because I think they have a few people out there. Steinbach, can you come online for a minute?
We're online.
Can you, yeah, I would love you to share with everybody else your adjectives.
All right, are you there?
Yeah,
Can you
go.
hear me? Old, forgetful, scared, nervous, restless, agitated, sad, stressful, aggressive, wandering, resistant, fighting.
Wow,
That's it.
awesome list. Okay, mute, I'm coming back to you. I'm going to pick on one more. How about folks up in Thompson? Can you unmute and give us your list?
Go ahead.
Sad, angry, hungry, uneasy, and tired.
Right on. Okay, thank you. You can mute now. All right, so that was just a small sampling, 2 out of 33 towns. And I don't want to jump the gun because I didn't hear all of Steinbach's earlier statements, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say between Steinbach and Thompson, first of all, thanks for volunteering. But secondly, it's really important that we identify for everyone out there that there wasn't one positive adjective on your list. So you need to take a deep breath, because if that is honestly your first thoughts on how you view and you feel about people with dementia, is it any wonder why people with dementia feel stigma, isolated, unwelcomed, unloved, misunderstood? I mean, I can go on. But you know, it would have been really nice, and perhaps after tonight or other times of education, if those lists started to say things like funny, loving, tender, gentle, warm, important. I think you know where I'm going with that. So, good job. And not to be hard on anybody out there, I do this, as do many of our Alzheimer's staff, do this exercise in public education. And we often get the very similar types of responses that both Steinbach and Thompson gave us. So it really is a huge awareness piece of the feelings and abilities of people with the dementia. Okay, we're going to move on. So if we take a look at what we know were the negatives, and we now start to look at what are the positives, and the positives are really part of the basis of providing good care. You want to think about what they do offer, people with dementia, what they do maintain or still have. So first of all, they have a history. Whether they are diagnosed at 42 or 82, they have 42 or 82 years of living. They may have been a mom and dad, a sister or brother, a child. They may have been a pet owner, an accountant, a doctor, a lawyer. They may have been really good community-minded people. They may have been a chaplain. I mean, they have a history. They've lived that long. They've acquired certain pieces of knowledge that are of value. And if you think about that, most of us as parents, we think our life history is significant enough that we try to impose it on our children and teach them life learning, right? So that should be no different than a person with a dementia. They have a history. There is a wealth of knowledge still in their brain. It's up to us to figure out how to tap into that. We also desperately, as all of us do, have a desire to belong and to be included and to be loved and to be understood. Those desires, those needs never dissipate. You may think they do because you may have less verbal opportunities to engage, but those things don't change. They also have a sense of humor, and this is something that you can tap into often as a caregiver. Even towards the very end stages, perhaps when their verbal skills are really quite limited, or even fully limited, where you may only get a blink or a nod or a smile, often you can still engage in humor. I'd say I haven't done this with anyone who is nonverbal, but I have done this with older adults who are limited in their language. And I have gone up to them after an introduction where they've met me and they feel safe and they know that I'm okay. I have said, knock, knock, and I have gotten, who's there? Now, I wouldn't be able to take it any further, but that knock, knock joke to most of us over the age of, 40, 50, we know that. We've heard that forever. So that's a perfect example of something that could be in the recessed memory where they can engage in. And it wouldn't really matter what you said after the knock knock, as long as they responded who's there, there's an opportunity for a laugh, and definitely there's already been an engagement. So those are some of the things you should really think about. Humor is something that you can really tap into for a long time. They do have a desire to contribute. I mean, people, just as human beings, we have desires to belong and contribute and to have a sense of purpose. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to perhaps be involved in the early morning hours. When I say early morning at a personal care home, I'm talking, between 8 and 10 in the morning. I've often been in a personal care home, particularly in the rural communities, where I really like to take some time and tour around, because they're, in some cases, because they're just logistically smaller facilities, there's a lot more integration of staff and residents of varied abilities. But I remember this one care home I went into particular, in the Interlake region, and seeing staff assisting with feeding breakfast, and in the corner there was about 3 or 4 elderly ladies. I don't know if they were verbal, but they definitely weren't speaking to one another, and they were all sitting around a table, and clearly their job was to fold towels and laundry. And that was such a meaningful experience for all these ladies who weren't necessarily engaged socially with each other, but they knew they had a job and a purpose. And let me tell you, in a small, busy community where resources can sometimes be really stretched, I'm sure the staff were happy to have the assistance of anyone who might fold a towel or diapers on for another ward or something. So their ability, again, in their recessed memory, a lot of women have done laundry all their life. They don't forget how to fold a towel or a diaper. So these are some activities that can be engaged in, and also show the need to offer them opportunities to still have meaningful activity and to be part of community and involved. Okay, so we're going to move on to the part about the communication piece. Now, we talked earlier about processing, so challenges finding the word, and then there's challenges with processing the information, and sometimes as caregivers we speak too quickly and we don't allow people the time to really digest and to respond. But the other part about the communication is things that have to do with body language and tone. So some of you may be familiar with this, that 7% of what you're actually hearing right now and absorbing, maybe not hearing but really processing, is what's coming out of my mouth. It's the verbal conversation that I'm having to you right now. Okay? So 7% of that is what you're absorbing, but 38% of that is my tone of voice. So if I talk really loud and wake some of you up, you will see the difference that a change of voice can make. And when I did raise my voice, and if I stunned some of you, I apologize, but I want just to bring to your attention that often as caregivers, when we're tired and frustrated, if I ask you to do something once and you don't get it or don't do it, then chances are I'm going to ask you again, and I might do it a little louder, and I might be a little bit more physical with my body. Because now, 55% of the message that you're receiving from me is coming from my body language. So let's not put too much emphasis on the verbal, the words, when we're looking at communicating with people with dementia. What we really need to focus on is tone of voice, so it's calm and soothing. And we also have to realize what our body is saying. It's really hard to smile and be really uptight. So we have to realize that, what I said earlier, in order to communicate effectively, we have to make sure that this person we're speaking to realizes that we're speaking to them, but then we have to figure out if they're ready to receive us, okay? Because there are often times where you may try to communicate with someone with dementia and they're just going to look away. They're just going to ignore you. Good on them. There's a reason for that. It might be your approach, okay? It may not, but there's usually a reason. If the energy is not good, there's a reason for that. So keep in mind, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I know that's not the first time you've heard that. Flip to this slide for a second, because I'd like you to see this. So this goes along the lines of the body language. So when we look at these three pictures, and this is the nonverbal communication. So the first photo on your left, I think it's the same as my left, the poor little lady who looks confused. We probably could see her from across the room and very clearly get an indication that something is wrong. She kind of looks confused even from afar. She wouldn't have to talk to us necessarily, but it might invite an opportunity to approach and offer help. However, in the middle, we see this angry man with a finger, and I can tell you right now, if I was in that same room and 10 or 15 feet away from that man, whether he was pointing at me and looking at like that, or at someone else, chances are whoever he's directing that posture to is, chances are, not that receptive to what's coming out of him. That controlling, domineering effect does not work well for people with dementia. And then when you take a look at the little baby on the right, you know, and every time I see that photo, I can hear a sound come out of that baby's mouth, a little coo or something, a laugh. You know, anyone who may hear a baby coo or cry instantly is looking around to try and figure out whose child, where's that child, what's wrong. So, you know, we are very intuitive to what we see and what we hear, but we can often read the message just in the body language that we're seeing. The next slide that I just wanted to share with you for a moment, I have a little bit of an issue with the gentleman in the chair and it looks like a worker behind them, but you know, I don't know the whole story, but this slide really refers to the meaningful touch. And again, touch is very significant coming back to when you engage in communication, the person you're speaking to has to know you're speaking to them and has to be receptive to you or the message. So often we do encourage gentle touch. My challenge with the two gentlemen there is I don't know if the man behind the man in the chair originally approached from the front or came up from behind. So that's the one dilemma I have on that photo, because you need to understand that you would never want to come up from behind or even from the side, depending what the peripheral vision is of the person with dementia, or not even a person with dementia. That could be a person with a visual impairment and some peripheral issues. You certainly wouldn't want to come up from the side or behind, because the opportunity to startle them is quite high. But the touch is very, very important. It provides a sense of comfort, perhaps, for particularly people who are losing their verbal abilities, it's an opportunity to share comfort and to show signs of acceptance, where sometimes words can be lost. Tone of voice. I'm going to flip back to the tone. I think this is telling also. So if we look at tone of voice, the first photo is two young ladies whispering. The middle is obviously a baby who's crying or having a temper tantrum, I'm not sure which, and then the third photo is someone yelling. So let's start on the first one. The one thing I want to share with you, even though this is a depiction of two young ladies seeming to share a harmless secret, you know what? Most of us, when secrets are being shared in front of others, are heightened to what is being said. And it's not uncommon when secrets are being shared in front of other people, for those who can't hear the message, for us to suspect or wonder if those two ladies are talking about me. I will say that I have worked in a retirement community where the average age of adults was 86 years of age. And without going into too much detail on the differences between men and women, how we grow up, etc., I will say that women as a whole are a little bit more tuned into the cliquishness of women and how we can be, whether it's from being kids in the schoolyard or, trust me, when you're 86 years of age. And I would see it day in and day out, two ladies having a very quiet conversation behind a hand in front of maybe someone else, and the other person is quite hurt with the thought that they're being spoken about like that. So whether you are whispering about someone in the room, it's not the point, it's the perception that that portrays. Now the young child and the crying face or the tantrum, I guess it would really depend on how you perceive that. If this is a child who is crying, I'm sure any one of us would get up in a heartbeat and seek out that child for comfort. However, if that was a child having a temper tantrum, we might have a different attitude. So tone of voice, particularly when we talk about babies and children, I mean, isn't that how we all kind of learned about, is that cry because they're hungry, or is that a cry because they're wet, or is that a cry because of something else? And we intuitively learn those different sounds as being young parents. And then looking at the last photograph, clearly this looks to me like someone who's yelling. And again, that yelling only heightens the posture of the messenger. The other thing that yelling can often do is it can raise your tone of voice to a high pitch frequency, which is often a pitch that we lose, that we become hard of hearing on first. So it's those high pitch frequencies that are often associated with yelling that are the most difficult to hear for people with cognition issues or people with a hearing impairment. Okay. I'm going to now go back to a slide because we're going to go into some key fundamentals of how to communicate, and there's some acronyms and you might want to write this down. Again, the slides will be posted onto our website after a couple days. It takes our communications department a couple days to get the video and the slides put up, so give us a couple days for that, but in case you want to make some notes, I'm going to go back to this slide. All this focused communication, and very clearly you can walk through it. So the first point is you must face the person. Second one is you must orientate them to the topic. And then the C is continue on the same topic. U is unstick by suggesting a word. S, structured questions so choice can be recognized. E, for exchange ideas in daily conversation. And D, direct, short, simple sentences. So the focused acronym, we're just going to break that down a little bit more, okay? So facing the person, let's put this in everyday terms for us who are still living in our homes perhaps, and maybe supporting someone with a dementia in our home. How often, if you think about this, are we at the kitchen sink washing dishes and talking to someone sitting at the table behind us? And it doesn't even necessarily have to be with a person with dementia. Just think about, this is my daily life. Maybe I have 2 or 3 kids eating a meal and I'm in a hurry and I'm the mom and I'm doing the dishes and I'm telling Betty Sue to eat her vegetables and Johnny to hurry up to get his soccer clothes on and go out and play. So we're accustomed just through the busyness of our lives of often not facing each other to talk. It's no different in the morning when I'm running upstairs to perhaps get ready for work and my husband's running downstairs to grab a cup of coffee and he's out the door before me. And as we pass each other, I might say to him, oh, don't forget blah, blah, blah. And he might say something to me, oh yeah, and remember so-and-so, so-and-so. And yet we're not even facing each other in that dialogue. But because we're not cognitively impaired, and hopefully we're in tune to each other, and especially my husband and I, there's only 2 of us in the house right now, so we're kind of talking to each other or we both have a problem. So we get that. We don't have to face each other. But if we go back to the kitchen sink environment and my mother with dementia is at the table and I'm washing my dishes and I'm saying, okay, Mom, make sure you eat all your dinner and then, we'll have cherry pie for dessert, and after dessert, we got to get dressed and we're going to go out to watch the kids play basketball. And I don't hear anything. So I turn around and there's Mom eating her dinner, not paying any attention to me. I'm thinking, well, that's really weird. So I turn around and say, hey Mom, did you hear what I said? And she's, dear, what? So now she's tuning in. But you have to really think about the fact that if she doesn't know I'm speaking to her, A, and B, wasn't ready to receive me because she didn't know I was speaking to her, is it any wonder that she didn't listen to me? Now the other thing you might want to think about, many of us, not all, but many of us, what do we have in front of the kitchen sink? Many of us have a window. And what often can you see in that window? A reflection. So even if I am talking, and even if I used her name, Mom, it might have caused her to look up. She may have seen a reflection in that window, thought I was talking to someone else, and tuned me out. So you really have to understand that facing the person and making sure they're ready to receive you is the start. Okay? Some other tips in there is when you start that conversation, use what I call smiling eyes. They want to see your eyes, and you need to smile. They need to know that things are calm, safe, happy. If I turn around and I'm anxious and I'm struggling and I'm in a hurry and get this and then do that, and we're, the body language is taking over, it's enough to make Mom kind of sit back and maybe not listen very much, or tune me out, or feel a little threatened or anxious, or start to fidget or want to get up and walk away. Energy is changing, and you have to understand that what we're working on is good energy or bad energy here. So that facing the person is important. Orientating to the topic, you really want to keep your conversation basic. So once I do turn around and I walk to that kitchen table, and I may touch my mom's arm if I need to, or not, if she's ready to receive me, I might say, hey Mom, how's dinner tasting? Oh, great dear, fine, thank you. But it wouldn't be, hey Mom, how's dinner tasting? And when you're done, I want to remind you that we have to get the clothes on because we've got to go watch the kids play basketball. But before we get there, we're going to stop at Martha's and pick up her kids and take them with us. I mean, just way too much information coming at this person. So stay on the same topic, very short, succinct. On that subject until you're done with it before you move on. If there is an exchange where mom, understands we're going to go watch the basketball game, she may say, well, I can't go until I put that thing on, so where's my thing? I need my thing. And now that thing becomes something that we're going to try and decipher together what she means. And she may narrow it down, and you may figure it out that she's looking for the word coat. She wants to go outside, it's cold, and that comes back to the being stuck on a word, that lack of knowing the right word. So when you get involved in her conversation, you're finding out that she's with you in communication, but she's having either troubles processing or finding the words. You really have to be present at that time. Present meaning pay attention, watch her body language, assure her that you want to help and that you'll figure it out together. Okay? The other thing that it talks about, the S in the focus, is structured questions so choice can be recognized. So if it was something as simple as, hey mom, you feeling hungry? Oh yes, I'm hungry, dear. Okay, what would you like to eat? Not a good question. Because now you're putting her in a position of either trying to process and come up with an answer. Maybe she's confused by even what your question even is. Or maybe she can't think of all the different options of food. So, hey mom, are you hungry? Oh yes, I am. She knows she's hungry. Great. Mom, I'm not quite sure. I've got some leftover meatloaf in the fridge, or how about some spaghetti? What would you prefer? So you really want to limit the choice in anything that you talk about. It's either or. It would be no different if you were helping mom or dad get dressed in the morning, and maybe you both go into the closet together. And maybe as the care provider, I'm going to pull out 2 outfits, and it becomes, hey, Dad, what do you feel like today? The blue or the brown? Oh, I'll take the blue. Okay, here you go. So you're involving them, you're empowering them, they're participating, they're getting to exercise choice, they're dignified, they're being respected, but you're limiting the options, which often minimize failure, okay? Exchange ideas, that was the E in the focused in daily conversation. So, things that are just very general and easy to talk about. Oh, it's a bad weather day today. It's snowing and it's cold out, or it's a beautiful day, or, I love that color on you, or that necklace you're wearing, or, where'd you get the shoes, or what are you watching there on TV, or is that a magazine you're reading? So very simple, everyday conversation. Again, you want to be mindful, though, that a person with a dementia who may have memory issues, I wouldn't encourage you to start off with, wow, did you see the opening ceremonies at the Olympics last night? Because if they are having short-term memory issues, last night in the Olympics may not resonate with them. So you may want to, engage in dialogue that is a little more dated. And that might be something like, as basic as, remember when you were working, Dad, and you had to go to the office every day, and, downtown on Portage Avenue and at Maine, remember you worked in the TD building, and remember when you took me up that elevator to the 28th floor, or, something that's very recessed in their memory that you might be able to really pull out and work on. Or if it was something about their career, and this is often a really good topic of conversation, mostly for older men, but not to say that there aren't a lot of ladies who had meaningful careers too, who are older adults. But often with men, they are so much about their career, in a generational role over older adults, and not to stereotype, but just to be simple for, educational purposes. A lot of the men went to work and brought home the money, and a lot of the women, not all, but a lot, were in the domestic role and raising the children. So often men really struggled with that loss of identity once they retired from work. So particularly in the case of a dementia, to have meaningful conversation, whether it be men or women, but particularly men, often if you jump back into the historical times of their career or their lifelong hobbies, you'll get really meaningful dialogue out, okay? Very direct, short, simple sentences. Let's not talk in great lengths, very short sentences, very succinct information. Okay? I'm going to take you to what's called the approach. And I kind of went through this once already. So the approach is from the front and move to the side. Maintain eye contact. You can use positive body language, and for many of us now, still over the age of 40 or even 30, positive body language often is a handshake, but particularly with our older adult population. Now I realize that particularly in some rural and remote communities, that we're dealing with cultural issues where perhaps, eye contact and touching may or may not be the effective way to proceed. And you have to, go one step further into that cultural component to try and figure out the best way to make that approach. We want people to be comfortable. And the other thing that you want to do is you want to call yourself by name and reintroduce yourself. So again, if I just break that down, when you approach someone with a dementia, cognitive impairment, the reason you want to approach from the front is, again, you might be dealing with peripheral issues in vision, or you might, be coming upon someone that you've never met before, so how would you even know about a visual challenge? And they may have an audio challenge that you don't even know about either. So that approach from the front is really important, so they see you coming. You, certainly if there's someone who are seated, you may not want to stand over them, because that standing person over someone who's sitting can be a very dominant, intimidating approach, right? So you might want to get down just a bit. But I do caution, and it's an individual decision, how far you get down, because I want to make it very clear that these are not children we're relating to, these are adults. So I don't like to get down too low, but some professionals I've met say, no, that's the only way to do it. So it's a case-by-case situation. The reason when you approach from the front and you make that contact, and then why you have to move to the side, is you do not want to restrain them. And we've had, terminology on chemical restraints and physical restraints. A physical restraint can be a barrier. I don't have to physically come from the front and put my hands down on their lap or their arms to restrain them. I can just be in their personal space. So you make that friendly approach with the smiling eyes from the front, and you move to the side. You can still talk, engage, touch, let them know that you're talking to them, but you want to give them opportunity at any time that they feel necessary to get up and leave. It's their choice, okay? The handshake is a wonderful tool, particularly with our older adults, and I challenge you, next time you go into an environment, maybe a care home, and you are in an environment with people with a dementia, if you are comfortable, I challenge you to approach someone from the front with smiling eyes. Extend your hand and introduce yourself and say, hi, my name is Maria, and your name is? Shake their hand and move to the side. So a couple things are going to happen there. I'm approaching from the front with the smiling eyes, and I extend the hand and I say, hi, my name's Maria, introduction. Your name is? And you've got to ask that. Because if I just come from the front and say, hi, my name is Maria, they likely will shake my hand. It's very familiar to them, a form of welcoming, acceptance. It's a lifelong history in their mind, right? But if I come from the front and say, hi, my name is Maria, and they reach and they shake my hand, and they may smile and nod, I have done this. I have sat there and nodded and smiled with people because I forgot to say, and what is your name? Or, and your name is, because that's the prompt. They need to be initiated. So you prompt them, and then you move to the side to take away that restriction, that threatening feeling from them, okay? So I challenge you to do that, because you may really shock yourself at how able that person really is, and maybe all these times you've been in that care home, you've never ever walked to them. You only walked around them, because your assumption was that they had some issues that maybe were uncomfortable or you didn't want to be too close to. And that's okay, that's just being human. But I guarantee you need to try this approach because it works a lot and it works really well. And don't be discouraged if they don't verbally respond, but be amazed when they either reach out to touch you or they at the very least give you a smile. And that is the win, and it is in that moment that counts, not what happens 3 or 4 seconds later. Them by name or ask for their name, but absolutely introduce yourself. A lot of families, we encourage them when you go into mom or dad and you see them that it's like, hey mom, it's Maria, your baby girl. Now I would do that for my mom because I would rather her look at me and say, my goodness, I know it's you, dear. I would rather her say that than for the opportunity where she may not be lucid at that moment and for her to look at me like, I don't know if I know this girl, right? And we've seen those looks on people. So I think it's really important that you introduce yourself each time. And again, dependent on the stage of dementia that you know this person to be at, but don't discount. If you're already seeing moments of lucidity come and go, then they are at that stage where it never hurts to reintroduce yourself, okay? So that's the approach. From the front, smiling eyes, maintain eye contact, positive body language, look for a handshake, it works beautifully. Maybe in another generation or two, if my children, your children were to get this, they may be high-fiving each other, but traditionally we're still in a culture where handshakes, for most of us, work very, very well. Okay, a positive approach, again, just showing you the slide, short, concise language, I said earlier, offer choices, ask for their help. Don't be shy on saying, oh, you know, would you like to come over to the sink and I'll give you a towel, wash, dry some dishes for me. Again, a great opportunity to engage for an older adult woman. She'll never forget how to dry a dish. You might make a decision on whether it's china or Corelle, but you also will have to make a decision that will it matter if, she puts the cups and the plates in different spots. So again, let's value the engagement and not necessarily the exactness of what we're trying to accomplish. Ask them to try. Sometimes it's that processing if they want to help but they don't know what to do. It might be a next step of putting the dish towel in their hands, maybe showing them or using hand over hand to dry it. There are a lot of tactics you can do to help engage activity. Break down the task step by step. That was just what I was talking about, that if you give a woman a tea towel and a plate and she still is unsure what to do with it, I might put my hand over her hand and hold the hand on the dish while we both wipe it together. Again, it may only in the big picture look at 30 seconds of engagement, but it might have been 30 seconds that she never got the rest of the day. So let's make many of those small moments happen. And if your approach is not working, stand back and think why. And there could be lots of reasons. It might not be that you're making any mistakes. She may or he may be tired or disinterested or hungry or in pain or any number of things. So it's not that you're doing anything wrong necessarily, but often what you can do is step away from that activity, and you can always come right around full circle in 60 seconds or an hour later and try it again. And you might be surprised that the second time around it works. Okay? Make the most of your time together. The critical part about this is in order to give good care and to engage in meaningful activity, you have to know something about their life history. If you are a friend or a neighbor or a professional care provider coming in to take care of someone that you know absolutely nothing about, I guarantee you it is going to be an uphill challenge. It may go rather well, but the key is you need to know something about them so that you can either launch into that conversation or you can engage them into something that you know will be enjoyable to them. relive the past with them. So if they want to talk to you about where they went to school, or the first car they ever drove, or the first home they ever bought, let's just go there. Whether it's right or wrong, the important thing is that we're engaged in communication and sharing. Enjoy the crystal moments. There are fewer as the disease progresses, so it's really important that when you do get those moments of pleasure and enjoyment and connection together, appreciate them for what they are. They're moments, but they're far deeper as far as value. And the value of those moments and the opportunity for people to feel supported, loved, and their sense of belonging is paramount to the end result. So you make your connections through that smiling approach and the gentle touch. Invite them to spend time together. Don't be the one who walks away. Be the one who walks towards and initiate the actions, because with the dementia, initiation is a very challenging thing for many of them to do. And lastly, but enjoy those crystal moments. In daily situations, encourage them to participate in conversation at mealtimes. Mealtimes are great opportunities. That's often where you will see in care homes, and not just care homes, but even like assisted living environments. They'll have table centers that will stimulate the season, so fall colors or snowman around Christmas, etc. These are all stimulants that are placed in order to encourage dialogue or to familiarize with time or date or place, okay, seasons. So mealtimes are a really good thing to talk amongst each other or to actually stimulate the conversation, particularly with women. It's always fun to walk up to a group of women who may be sitting at a table of 4 and they're all enjoying their meals, and they may not even be talking to each other until you stop by and say, "Oh, how's the meatloaf?" And one will pop up and say, "Oh, not so good. Mine was way better." And then that's enough to launch the other lady and say, "Oh, really? Well, what did you use in your recipe?" And the other lady may say, "Well, you know what? I would never use that. I use." So now what we've done, and I used to do this a lot, I used to kind of just open the can and whatever came out, came out. But what I was doing is I was initiating conversation. And that's what we have to do. We have to initiate, and hopefully in a time and in a sensitivity that we can stimulate them in a positive fashion. When you approach people, expect something back. Whether it's a nod, a smile, a word, a statement, a hug, a touch, a kiss, but have an expectation. It's no different than if one of you was in this room with me right now and I walked right up to you. You might think, okay, is she going to ask me something or do something? Like, you have an expectation, right? So when you approach someone, have an expectation. Now, it may not end up being what you wanted it to be, but the fact is that you are attempting a connection, an engagement, and if you expect some reciprocation out of it, you're probably going to notice some. It's when you don't have that expectation, you don't look for it. And sometimes it's the subtleties that we have to really uncover. It might just be the sense that they're at peace with us right beside them, or again, it might be a verbal comment. Okay? And initiate conversation from their long-term memory, and this is something I've touched on a couple times already tonight. So, getting back into the histories of where they came from, how many children they had, their first home, their first job, how they met their husband, their wife. You start way back in history and move that conversation more forward into current day until you get stuck. And that will give you an idea of where you should stay or where you should be. Okay?